Recently I took part in what's probably the largest and most hyped triathlon here in the UK. Yes, I got to race in the London T100 race being run by the brand new PTO. Now, not only did I get to race the Olympic distance here, I also got to watch the male and female pro athletes go head to head on the same course that we were racing on. So in today's video, I'm going to break down all about the race, about the atmosphere leading up to it, about my experience doing the Olympic distance, and about those men and women's pro races. Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Josh, an age group triathlete based here in London, and on this channel we talk all things triathlon, whether that be race recaps like this one or product and training videos. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, please do consider subscribing to the channel. But first, let's go over a little bit of background about this race. This race, like I said, is being organised by the PTO. For those of you who don't know, they've been around for 2 years before now, but they've been running more of a major circuit, traditional, similar to golf, let's say, rather than a kind of series more like Formula One, which is what the T100 is, and they made that switch in 2024. So this is the first time we're getting these newly branded T100 races. And to give this race series some legitimacy, they've also partnered with World Triathlon, who run the sprint and Olympic distance racing, and also officiate the Olympic distance racing that took place recently. They've done this to be the long distance partner of World Triathlon, meaning that at the end of this, they will be able to crown an official world champion. To make the T100 series, they picked 8 locations throughout the world, and the London Triathlon was one of those. It's not a new race. Any of those of you who are familiar with my channel or just British triathlon in general, the London Triathlon has been around for well over a decade, if not 2. It's one of the most popular triathlons here in the UK, and it's one that I've done for the past few years. I'll leave a link to those videos in the video description if you want to go back and see a slightly younger, less haggard Josh talk about his first experiences doing triathlon. I think it's also really important to talk about the course and the organisation at the race. And now, for any of you who have watched any of the other T100 races, you'll know they're not necessarily the most inspiring courses, is the way I would describe it. And I have to say the London course is pretty similar. It's another slightly out of a major city on pretty main roads in an area that isn't highly populated, and therefore, and if any of you watch the London race or any of the other T100 races, in all fairness, the crowds aren't necessarily that spectacular, and I think this was again the case at London, unfortunately. Having said that though, at least as a participant and what I could tell from the pro races, the event was incredibly well run. The staff and volunteers deserve massive shout outs respectively for just being incredibly helpful, incredibly friendly, and making it an amazing experience for, you know, a triathlon veteran such as myself, but also a number of people that I knew who were doing their first race at this year's event. It's great to see how well this race was participated, and I think the marketing and organisation that the PTO and T100 were doing for this race is a genuinely big part of that. However, it's not all positive. Like every year at this race, there's complaints about the road surface, and I was really hoping that because this is a VC-backed group in the PTO organising the T100 World Tour, this is the most money and eyes this race has ever had. I was really hoping they'd be able to at least attempt to work with local councils to try and get some of the local roads repaved, especially on the relatively small 5 or so K loop the pros were going to be going on. But unfortunately, it seems they are just even worse than the last time I did this race 2 years ago. Bottles everywhere. I'm sure there were some crashes like there were a couple of years ago. Just dreadful road surfaces, and I know reading the comments from a lot of the pros after the race and after some of their pre-rides, it really impacted the dynamic of the pro race. And as always, the bike was incredibly congested. Now, luckily, and we'll get on to talking about this later, but I didn't have that much congestion on my first lap of the course, mainly because I was one of the first people out of the water. But I know from everyone else who was later out on the course, it was pretty much impossible to not draft. People were just all over the road. And again, this is a organisation, this is a numbers point, and I really had hoped that, although this was a pre-existing problem at the London Triathlon, that the PTO and T100 could have taken feedback from previous races and started to make some changes given their financial position. I'd also, and this might seem a little bit weird, but I'd also like to talk about the vibe at the race, because I think this is really important. And for me and for a lot of the other experienced triathletes that I was there with, I think it was quite noticeable how I felt like the event was lacking a little bit of soul. For those of you who maybe haven't been before or aren't familiar with the race, the transition and expo and finish line is inside a really large convention centre in East London called the XL. This is a great space because it means that, you know, transition is massive. There's ample space. They could make it bigger if they wanted to. They're not limited that way. It's dry. It's right by the place where you swim. But it is always a bit weird, especially when the weather is really nice outside. You've got, like, you know, sunlight streaming in through the hangar doors in the convention centre, and it's always just a bit dark and a bit oppressive. And I'd hoped that the T100 could kind of change the vibe there, but I actually think it was worse than previous years. In previous years, there have been more vendors in the expo, more food places, more drink places within the main hall, and because I guess the T100 race is sticking really specifically to their sponsors, the hall definitely felt a little bit empty. I think the only group that I could probably shout out would be Canyon. I think Canyon had an incredible presence there. They had the largest booth, probably 3 or 4 times larger than any other sponsor, and there they were doing their kind of standard bike maintenance they do for Canyon customers, also giving out free coffees to everyone, and they had comfortable seats for the live coverage of the race. So I would have just loved to have seen more of that, engagement with some of the brands that support the T100. Again, I know this might be an unrealistic expectation, considering this is the first time this event was run by the T100, but when you come in and you want to shake up the sport and really kind of bring it into the mainstream, I think you need to change everything, and that viewing experience was arguably worse than previous years. But that's just the kind of general event itself. Let's talk about the race itself, and I'm going to try and speed through this because, again, it is a race that I have done a few times before. But let's start with the swim. For the swim, this is something I've been trying to work on. I tried to get there really early, and I managed to get a great spot for the swim start. I was kind of 4th or 5th going into the water, and that meant that I was right at the front and was able to have enough space but also be on the right feet to start with, and that played out perfectly for the first 500 or 600 meters. But coming up to the first turn buoy, unfortunately I lost the feet of the front group, and I think I just didn't react fast enough to pick up my pace, and once they were kind of 10-15 meters ahead of me, I just didn't have a chance of catching back on, and they ended up swimming a couple of minutes faster. So I know that's a great reminder for me to maybe kick myself into gear and put a little bit more effort in, but overall I still managed to take 1.5 minutes off my swim for this distance, and that's quite a significant PB, so can't complain too much really when it comes to the swim. I also came out of the water with the 19th fastest time overall of the weekend, and I'm really pleased with that. I felt like I had a really good transition coming out of the water. I felt really strong. It's a small kind of jog up some stairs and then around, a really big transition for the London Triathlon. I felt really calm, really good getting onto the bike, and like I said, because I was so close to the start and there were only a few waves of the middle distance that went off before me, I was in a great position towards the front of the race. I think I was 6th out of the water, in the Olympic distance, so I was really able to avoid a lot of the congestion on the first of 2 laps, and that put me in a great position to make sure that I was getting aero, putting out consistent power, and I felt really strong on the bike and able to push more watts than I'd necessarily expected. On the second lap, it was definitely a lot more congested. This is a smaller lap where you go through some of the more narrow parts of the course again, so I was definitely coming out of aero a lot more, not able to put consistent power down as much as I did in the second lap, and kind of shouting on your right quite a lot, so I hope I didn't scare anyone, but it's the best way to kind of make sure people are safe and aware of you as you pass them. I was kind of conscious of losing a little bit of time to some of those in front of me in that congestion, because I think they might have navigated it slightly better than I did, but I managed to get my feet out of my shoes before walking into transition, which is not something I always manage to do. So being able to kind of avoid that step in transition and run barefoot through quite a long transition was significantly more comfortable than running in bike shoes, and is definitely something that I'm practicing going forward. Even with those problems on the second lap of the course, I still managed to go sub 1 hour, which is my first time going sub 1 hour for the Olympic distance, and I did the 23rd fastest bike split of the day. Out onto the run, and again, a pretty decent transition, although I have had some blistering in my race shoes recently, so I put on socks which slowed me down by maybe 20 or 30 seconds, if that. The course is just the same as previous years for the Olympic distance, so that's 4 2.5 kilometre laps with a pretty big ramp in and out of the Excel Centre, and the overriding thing that came important to me in the run was heat. It was an incredibly hot day, hitting mid to high 20 degrees by early morning, and I don't think I quite respected that. I pushed myself really hard in the first 2 laps without taking on any water, any fuel, and not using any of the ice that was on course, and that really came to bite me in the 3rd and 4th laps. I was just too hot, and that meant I was kind of grinding myself through those last second half of the course. I still managed to do a top 100 run on the day, which is really good for me, but it shows you why I try and work so hard on my run, because it is a fair bit worse than the other 2 disciplines for me. Overall though, I'm really happy. I really enjoyed this race. Like I talked about the organisation earlier on, I thought T100 did a great job, and I was really happy with my performance. Coming at 19th overall in my first Olympic distance race in well over 2 years is a really great achievement, considering it's not something that I typically train for, and now we are going back full steam ahead to Ironman training. And I'll give you a quick roundup of what it was like to watch the pros, and the kind of word I would use to describe the experience was disappointing. It's amazing to have such a high quality field come to the UK. It's not something that we typically get. However, I wish I could have seen them more. The course is not conducive to really exciting racing. The viewpoints were not amazing as a live spectator. It was honestly better to sit in the Excel Centre and watch the live coverage on the big screen there, and then walk over to the transition and watch the pros come in and out there, compared to actually going course side. I really would have wished for more open air commentary, more music, more something to get fans engaged, because it felt a little bit like a ghost town out on course. And again, that might sound harsh, but I just believe that with the position the T100 are in, they can do better than this. So I'll definitely be back next year to see how it has changed. However, that's it for this year's T100 race recap. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a great next training session.